Welcome to Narcissist Apocalypse, everyone. I am Brandon Chadwick, and today we will be doing a debrief, a follow-up on the re-release of Hans's story. And Hans's story started a long time before the marriage began. He grew up moving from town to town, always being the new kid, always trying to catch up socially, never feeling settled. His father was mostly absent even when he was physically around, and the little moments of connection that they did have were tied to things like alcohol, performance, or brief flashes of attention. And then his father left, and his father kept letting him down and became someone Hans kept chasing instead of someone that he could count on. And he never doubted that his mom loved him, but she was overwhelmed, emotionally shut down, and not able to give him the kind of warmth and safety that he needed to help him feel secure. So Hans grew up very lonely and always was working for a connection in his life. And when he met his future wife, what hit him the most was that she really seemed to want him around. And she was a very social person, a very magnetic person, and she kept on showing up for him. And for someone who really didn't matter to the adults in his life and was looking for love, for Hans here, he feels chosen. And early on in this relationship, after he is chosen, there's closeness, then there's distance, and sometimes there's intimacy, and then that completely gets disrupted. So he's already now early on in this relationship trying to just not say the wrong thing because he feels deep inside that maybe if he does, this whole thing could be over. So as this relationship continues to go on, Hans keeps himself small for this relationship to continue. And with his wife, as things went on, there was always some huge problem taking over everything. And it could be financial, a health panic, a work crisis, business crisis, debt, frozen accounts. There was just chaos around the kids. It was just one thing after another. And Hans became the one who worked, fixed, built, drove, managed everything. He absorbed everything. He carried the labor. He carried the pressure. He carried the responsibility. Hans's partner, she controlled the money. She created instability, and everything inside this family began to orbit around her and the latest emergency that she created, the crisis that she created. So Hans was now living in a system here where stress was the way that this whole entire relationship and this family was organized. It became the organizing principle. Crisis became the organizing principle here. So when they had children, it made it even harder for Hans to leave and to see a way out because Hans wanted to be the father that he never had. And that was part of his identity. And when something like that is part of your identity, you really don't want that to go away. So he kept staying, kept carrying the load, just kept trying to hold everything together because he believed that this is what a father does. So eventually, when Hans does leave, the abuse here doesn't stop. It just changes. So custody becomes a new place for control. The children here become a big pressure point, time with them, access to them, and their perception of him all became part of this ongoing abuse. So that was the summary of Hans's story. And if you want to be a guest like Hans was on our Survivor Stories, go to our website at narcissistapocalypse.com, click on the guest form, fill out our guest form, press the submit button, and we'll go from there. Also, we have a support group on our website with Zoom meetings every Wednesday night, Thursday afternoons, and Saturday nights. And we have forum boards for you to post on. That is our support group at narcissistapocalypse.com. And we also have a newsletter at our website as well. It's an informative newsletter where you can get a free workbook for every new survivor story. So that's at narcissistapocalypse.com. And now we will get into the big key takeaways and themes of Hans's story. And the first big key theme and takeaway is that this relationship ran on crisis. There was always something huge for Hans to solve. Something urgent was always going on. Something destabilizing was always going on. And a health panic, a sudden demand that couldn't be discussed rationally. There was a business to save, debt to manage, taxes not paid, frozen accounts, custody manipulation. There was always a constant crisis going on. And for Hans here, this constant crisis is keeping him from really stepping back and seeing the system that he is in. So if he's always solving problems, always fixing things, always teaching things, or earning, or driving, or trying to calm things down, or recovering from something, you don't really have much space left to ask yourself, like, why is my life always being organized around this crisis or someone else's chaos that they're creating? So crisis here really kept Hans very busy. It kept him tired. It kept him reactive, and that made him easier to control. And I'm sure a lot of you are going through this right now or have gone through this. Another big key takeaway is being chosen as being a trap. And for Hans, way before this marriage begins, as we mentioned before, Hans really came into this with a lot of old wounds, not feeling wanted in his life by his dad, not knowing where he stood. He spent a lot of years trying to get connections from people, and now this person, who became his spouse, the abuser in his life, seems to be choosing him, flattering him, and that's a big, 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 big thing for someone like Hans. And I'm sure many out there who are listening to this could have happened to you too. When you feel like you are chosen, that euphoria, all of those feelings can override everything else. And you do not want to lose that. We hear this all the time on the show. And being chosen can keep someone in a relationship longer, especially when that choice is landing on top of these old wounds here, or also societal norms of being chosen. So leaving at this point no longer feels like you're ending a bad relationship, a toxic relationship. It can really feel like you're losing the person who finally saw you. And that makes the survivor more likely to tolerate confusion or mixed signals or control, because the emotional meaning of this bond is really larger than the facts of the situation, and that those feelings can really keep someone in a relationship for a long time. And the next thing we have up on our list is key takeaways or key themes, is the financial abuse and engineered instability. And this was a huge part of this story, and it was a system that kept Hans responsible for the whole family, but also didn't give him any real power at all. So he's working, he's paying, he's building things, he's free labor, he did payroll calculations, he handled tax paperwork, he kept trying to support the business and the household. And at the same time, Hans' spouse controlled the money, hid information, mixed business and personal accounts, let debt pile up, failed to pay big obligations, and created a life where financial disaster was just a second away all the time. And Hans later then found out that the accounts were in his name and he didn't even know about it. So this kind of instability is keeping Hans trapped, keeping others trapped, because it makes stopping taking care of these things feel dangerous. So if Hans stopped carrying all of this whole structure could collapse. And if he stepped back, it didn't feel like he was setting a boundary. It felt like not just abandoning the family, it's like abandoning everyone, that a disaster is going to occur if he doesn't. And this was real. Like, this isn't irrational. This is a real thing, that disaster could occur. And this type of financial abuse is keeping Hans in this relationship much longer. And for survivors like him, they start to feel like their labor is the only thing standing in between the family and total ruin. And as I said, for Hans, this wasn't irrational. This was true. And he was keeping everything from collapse. And the next one we have on our list here is the public persona versus the private abuse that is going on. And outside the home, Hans's abuser could seem wonderful, but inside the home, Hans was living with rage, pressure, manipulation, financial instability, constant crisis. And Hans even says that he loved when people came over because that was the only time that his spouse was nice to him. And I think that says a lot. It means really kindness existed when there was an audience. And that can be confusing for many, but it can also show that abuse here is a choice. And they're choosing to be abusive. They can be nice when they want to be, but it is done in a way so no one knows what is going on behind closed doors. And that public image here is protecting the abuser, and it's isolating Hans, isolating survivors, and this can keep someone in control for a lot longer. And then another big takeaway from this episode is hope. And Hans kept getting pulled forward by this idea that peace was just on the other side of any problem that he was about to solve. If he could just fix this one thing, then life would calm down. Then the family could be happy, he was saying to himself. Then everything would finally work. He says this pattern directly: solve this one problem, then everything else will be okay. And this kind of hope keeps someone in a relationship longer because it makes abuse look like just a rough stretch instead of a system that you're in. So the abuse victim or the survivor or Hans, they might think, we are almost through this part. So this type of hope can keep a survivor really investing in a future that will never arrive. And then the next one on our list is the slow erasure of one's self. And Hans kept adapting. Hans gave in a lot. He worked more. He carried more. He drove more. He managed more. He tolerated more. And over time, his own wants, his needs, instincts, and limits kept moving further into the background. They got put onto the back burner. And Hans says that he came to feel like he had no say in any aspect of his life. And that feeling of not counting at all is this big self-erasure that is happening here. And Hans isn't just staying in the relationship. He's really disappearing inside of it. And when that happens, and it's happening slowly enough, this can really start to feel normal, the slow erasure of oneself. And once this is normalized and it continues to go and go and go, all of a sudden there's nothing of you left. And this whole relationship is based upon this other person's chaos, this other person's control, this other person's world. And that's what happened here. And then the next one and last one on our list is the children in the post-separation abuse here. And after separation, the children became a way to, for control to continue. Hans describes his mediation turning into like a big bait and switch, parenting time being restricted, the kids being overscheduled on his time, and blame being directed at him through the children. And this kept him control even after he left, because now there's these pressure points that weren't on the marriage. It was now these pressure points about his relationship with the kids. And we knew how he grew up. And we knew he wanted to be a good dad. So he's really trying his best to regulate himself here. So he's not telling the children everything that's going on, even when lies are being told about him. And this is the post-separation abuse. And the healthy parent here often ends up carrying the big emotional burden. And he is. There's just a lot of lies being told. And he's being put into situations to make him look like the bad person. And he wants to be a good dad. So this abuse can continue in the aftermath as well. So those were our takeaways. And now we're going to get to the fear, obligation, guilt, and shame of Hans's story. And the first fear here is related to Hans being chosen and initially not being able to say anything back, and the abuser here being able to kind of do what they want, a little bit of push and pull, the intimacy, non-intimacy, and the idea that it could be taken away from him at any time. And this being a real initial fear here, that if he was to say something, it would be gone. So the beginning parts of the relationship before a marriage even begins is really based around this fear that these things could be taken away. So he's being trained right here that if he says anything, that everything will disappear. So he's not standing up for himself. And that's the initial fear that keeps this relationship going, because of that overwhelming feeling of being chosen. He doesn't want to let that go. So when he does get to the point where they do become married, and everything here is also shaped by the abandonment that had occurred before, and he's entering this relationship, when disagreements could happen, there could be big reactions, or there's a constant crisis, or a fallout can happen. So based upon him already being trained here, now fear going on here, it makes compliance here just feel safer than pushing back. And it kept him focused on staying in this relationship early, and now in the relationship trying to prevent the next problem, instead of really calling out what was going on, the abuse that was actually happening, and the dynamics that were already at play here. And that's a big part of this story, because he is being trained here. So fear is constantly running through this story. And then it only deepens when they do have children. And that would be the fear becoming his father, who, he felt abandoned him, and fear of breaking up the family, and then fear of losing access to the kids. Being a dad meant a lot to him. So the abuser here knows all of these things, knows all of the buttons and the fear buttons to push here. And that made leaving feel dangerous. He already had an inkling that things were dangerous even when they were dating. And as time goes on here, the abuser just gets more emboldened, and it keeps Hans in this relationship longer. And then we have obligation, and obligation keeps Hans in this relationship by making his sacrifice feel like his duty. So Hans here feels responsible for holding everything together: the house, the work, the business, the debt, the childcare, the family. He was not only trying to be a good husband and a good father, he was trying to keep the whole structure from collapsing. And that kind of obligation can trap someone for years, because if you leave, it means you could be a failure of all these obligations. And financial obligations matter here too, because Hans was helping keep her business together. He was doing the labor, handling paperwork, and carrying the big burdens of the systems he did not control. And that kept him controlled because of the consequences. If he didn't do it all, if he didn't do all these financial things, there would be a disaster. And then we have guilt. And guilt kept Hans in this relationship by making him feel like he still had something left to fix. So Hans is the one working, carrying things, building things, solving things, trying to hold all of this structure together. So when life kept collapsing around him, guilt here could easily turn that into a question of whether he had done enough, carried enough, protected enough. So instead of seeing the whole system clearly, guilt here can get Hans, and did get Hans, to really invest more of themselves into saving these situations, to fixing these situations. And when it comes to the children, this guilt became bigger, because Hans wanted to be the father that he never had. And, feeling like he abandoned his children, there's a big guilt there. But he didn't want to be what he came from, or where he came from. So there are two elements of guilt here. Guilt that he should be doing more to save everything, and then guilt to the children, because he didn't want to abandon them in the same way that his dad abandoned him. And it keeps him in this relationship longer, trying to fix things, trying to be responsible for things, so everyone feels less harm. And the only person that's getting harmed here is him. And unbeknownst to him, the children were as well, but that took a longer time to see. And then there is shame. And shame here is interesting, because in this story, in this relationship, Hans is doubting his own rights to name what is actually going on. So Hans grew up feeling different, and he was the new kid. He was the lonely kid, the kid who struggled socially, and the kid teachers could make an example of. So experiences like that can really leave a big wound, like something is wrong with you. And when that kind of shame is already there, abuse doesn't really get read clearly as abuse to begin with. Sometimes it gets filtered through the question, maybe this is happening because there's something wrong with me. So this shame right here with Hans in this relationship, it keeps him here longer because it's really turning this focus inward. So instead of standing firmly, he was really vulnerable to the ideas that he may be the problem, that he might be failing other people, or that somehow he should be the one that makes everything work. If you were just a stronger person, if you were just a better person, if you were a more capable person. So shame here makes self-protection harder because it's quietly telling him that he doesn't deserve it, that he doesn't deserve to be treated well because of who he is as a person. And that's a big thing to carry, and it's how the shame really worked in this story. And I'm sure for a lot of you out there, the shame worked in that way as well. So everything here worked in a way where disagreement had a price in this household. So fear taught him that pushing back would lead to more chaos. Obligation told him that he had to hold this family together, the money together, and the children together, even after all of this chaos is going on. Guilt made him feel like giving in was better than the escalations that would occur, and shame made him question why he couldn't manage all of this better. So the control here was not just that his abuser is creating crisis, it was that resisting her created more of it. So that is the fear, obligation, and guilt and shame. And now for Hans, what we want in the aftermath, I want Hans to understand that being a good father does not mean absorbing endless harm from others. You can still be a good dad, and he can still be a protective dad at the same time. And I just want Hans also to release the belief that leaving made him the abandoning parent, because it did not make him the abandoning parent. He was being the good parent by doing this, because he's now giving his kids a chance by doing so. And I want Hans to build a life that is no longer organized around chaos, around emergency, and around someone else's fallout and other people's reactions. And I just want him to, live in peace. And when someone has lived in crisis as long as Hans did, and so many of you did, peace might not really feel familiar. And part of healing is learning to be okay with that calm, and to live in that calm, and to feel safety in that calm, and maybe just be alone for a little bit of time to get that back, to get your nervous system back, and get yourself back online. And so I really just want to thank Hans once again for being our guest many years ago on our show. And he's a really good person, and I just really hope that Hans is doing well right now. And if you want to be a guest like Hans was on our Survivor Story episodes, go to our website at narcissistapocalypse.com, click on our guest form button, fill out our form, press the submit button. We'll go from there. Also at our website, we have a support group, and inside our support group, we have Zoom meetings every Wednesday night, Thursday afternoons, and Saturday nights. We have forum boards for you to post on to get the validation that you need from survivors just like you. It is a wonderful group of people on there, and you can make a lot of friends too. So join our support group today. And we also have a newsletter, and our newsletter has a lot of interesting information on there every week, but we also have a free workbook from every new survivor story that we put out, and that has reflections in there. It's a worksheet, and it can really be helpful for you in your healing process, and give you an extra bit of help on every single episode, and fill out journal prompts and things like that. So that is our newsletter at narcissistapocalypse.com. And that is it for this debrief episode. So for myself and Hans, once again, we hope you have a good night.